Okay, good afternoon, members. I'm Amanda Brown. I'm the Clerk and Monitoring Officer for Avon Fire Authority. I'm starting off this meeting for you today. So it's the Avon Fire Authority Annual General Meeting. So welcome. It's Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2024, and we're in the engine bay of Hicks Fire Station, which is why it's a little more echoey than we are used to. So the first item on the agenda is the election of chair for this municipal year. So I'm presenting this agenda item. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor?
Yeah, with great pleasure. I propose Councillor Ben Nutland to be the chair of the Fire Authority.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second, Councillor Ben Nutland.
Thank you, Councillor Renhoff, much appreciated. So, shall we take a vote then? Do I have any votes against? Any abstentions? Votes in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. So, Councillor Nutland, come and take us chair. Thank you. Congratulations. I'll now hand over the script to your new chair.
Okay, we do have an agenda, but I will just break it slightly in. But I'd just like to thank everyone who just gave me that great honour to take over this body. It's, as I said in our induction the other day, this is a fantastic organisation filled with fantastic people who do amazing things day in, day out. And certainly I will welcome you all later on, but for our new members, use every opportunity that you do have here because it will be an amazing experience. Okay, so item 2 is the election of a vice chair for the municipal year. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Renard?
I'd be delighted to propose Councillor Paul Goggin.
And do I have a seconder?
Could I second Councillor Goggin?
Okay, so we'll take a vote. So votes against? Any abstentions?
4 abstentions.
4 abstentions. And votes for? Brilliant.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, congratulations, Councillor Goggin. Okay, on to item 3, apologies for absence.
Now, we do have a few, so we have apologies from Councillors Kent, Stansfield, Murphy and May, and I believe we're still missing Councillors Moss and Williams, although they may be en route.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. There is no planned fire alarm today, so if a fire alarm does operate, it will be for real. Can I ask members to exit the building either through the rear of the appliance bay or open the doors and we'll go out through the front and we congregate. If we go out through the front, turn left and there's a yellow hatched area and we'll congregate in that yellow hatched area to do a roll call. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Item 5, declarations of interest.
None advised. Any declarations of interest in the room? No.
Item 6, public access.
None received.
Item 7, Chair's business. So I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting today, especially to our newer members. Just to confirm, this is a working fire station, so if a fire alarm does go off, there's a good chance it's an actual call out. So we were recording the meeting for the public to view on the Avon Fire Authority YouTube channel. I'd like to especially welcome our new members, Councillor Chris Murphy, Kieran Cronley, Tim Kent, Serena Ralston, Tom Renard and Cam Hayward to the authority. I'd also like to thank councillors that aren't returning and wish them the best of the future, which would be Councillor Smith and Councillor Tucker. Over to the clerk.
Thank you. Just a general notice, you will all be aware that we have now published our pre-election guidance, which will remain in place until the polls close for the general elections on the 4th of July. So members and officers are encouraged to read that guidance, which has been emailed to you, and to act in accordance with. But for the avoidance of doubt, all fire authority meetings will continue to deal with the daily business of the fire authority. That shouldn't be impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'd like to thank our station manager today, Danny McCarthy, the crew manager, John Crowley, and the crew here at Hicks Fire Station for their help in arranging the demonstrations earlier, which I think everyone can thoroughly say they enjoyed, and for accommodating this meeting.
Just a reminder from me that we are now transferring to an online way of declaring your register of interests as members. So when you join a fire authority, that's one of the first things you have to do. So you will be receiving an email from us with a link when the system goes live, which we hope will be in the next couple of days. And it saves you filling in a manual form, which Emma then has to process. You just fill in the details yourself online. So it should be a lot swifter. So you will get a link to do that quite soon. If I could ask that you do that as soon as you receive the link. Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Just need for clarification for the election just we made now. Is this clearly says municipal year, so it's going to be like every year election, or it will be like the next 4 years, the chair and the vice chair?
So every year, Councillor, we re-look at who's going to be the chair and vice chair of the fire authority. So it's not a 4-year post, it's an annual decision.
Thank you for clarification.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask members to introduce themselves now, so I'll begin and then we'll go that way around, okay? So I'm Councillor Ben Nutland, the Chair of the Avon Fire Authority.
Councillor Paul Goggin from Bristol, Hartcliffe and Withywood Ward.
Councillor Cam Hayward, Bristol, Knoll Ward.
Councillor Kieran Connolly from North Somerset, representing Winterstoke in Weston-super-Mare.
Councillor Serena Ralston, representing Clifton Down Ward, Bristol.
I'm Robert Payne. Good afternoon. I'm Councillor for Weston-super-Mare Central, North Somerset Council.
Hello, I'm Councillor Tom Renhard, representing Horfield Ward in Bristol.
Good afternoon, Councillor Matthew Riddle from the Severn Vale Ward in South Gloucestershire.
Councillor Dan Thomas, Congsby and Puxton on North Somerset Council.
Councillor Richard Eddy, Bishopswood, Bristol.
Councillor Yasin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill Ward, Bristol City Council.
Councillor Ron Gurthani, Coombe Down Ward, Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor David Wilcox, representing Lockleys in the fine city and county of Bristol.
I'm Councillor Ron Hardy, representing Emerson's Green, South Gloucester.
Okay, thank you, members. Now, if I could ask officers to do the same. So we'll start off with the Chief Fire Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Simon Shilton, your Chief Fire Officer and Chief Exec.
Good afternoon, everyone. Luke Gazzard, Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Service Delivery.
Good afternoon, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services Assistant.
Good afternoon, Jane Williams-Locke, Deputy Director of Corporate Services.
Good afternoon, Claire, Head of Finance.
Good afternoon, members. Richard Welch, Assistant Chief Fire Officer.
Good afternoon, I'm Verity Lee, Statutory Finance Officer.
Good afternoon again, Amanda Brown, Clerk and Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, officers. I would just like to congratulate Luke Gazzard on his promotion and welcome him to his first official meeting of the Fire Authority as Assistant Chief. So welcome, Luke. Okay, can I just ask everyone to put their phones onto silent if you haven't already done so? I'd just like to remind attendees to use their microphones when speaking and to remember to turn them off for the benefit of the online recording. Just to advise that any vote required, as just previously demonstrated, I'll ask members for a show of hands, any votes against, any abstentions, and any votes for. So now on to item 8, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Avon Fire Authority held on the 20th of March 2024. I'll move those. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Eddy? Okay, any votes against? Any abstentions? Any votes for? Okay. Okay. Item 9 are the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee held on the 7th of December. And if it's okay with you members, I'd like to take these on block just so we don't have to go through every single one of them. 9.2 minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee held on the 13th of December, and the confidential minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee held on the 7th of December, and the confidential minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Policy and Resources Committee held on the 13th of December. Now, obviously, if people want to discuss the confidential minutes, we will have to go into confidential session at the end. Now, does anyone want to discuss the minutes? No. So if we take them on block, okay.
Just for noting.
Yep. So just for noting. Okay. Item 10, which is the member appointments for the municipal year. The clerk is to present. So Amanda.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies in advance. It's a bit like the clerk and the statutory finance officer show today. So we've got a few papers. I've got 5 papers, and Verity's got a few papers as well. So this is my first paper. It's paper number 10, and it's at page 45 of your bundle. So this report from me sets out the nominations I have received from your unitary authorities for the 20 members of the Fire Authority. And what I'm asking you to do is to agree to allocate yourselves to the committees, the 2 committees, the Policy and Resources Committee and the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee. And then what will happen is the vice chairs of those committees will be appointed at the first meeting of those committees for the municipal year. I'm also asking you to appoint your representative to the Local Government Association and to appoint a representative for the South West Council's meetings which take place, and also, if possible, seek volunteers to be trustees for our partner charity, the Gambia and Avon Fire Service in Partnership, which I know some of you know a bit about already. So in terms of detail, the nominations were received this year a little bit later than usual, and that's following the elections in Bristol. And if I refer you to page 49 of the bundle at Appendix 1, that's the list of your fellow members. There's 20 of you. You will notice that the PCC is no longer, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset is no longer a member of the Fire Authority. And the reason for that is the individual who accepts the post has to apply afresh each time. So you've now got a new Police and Crime Commissioner in Avon and Somerset. I think it's Claire Moody, who's a Labour candidate. And I'm waiting to see if she's going to apply to be a member of the Fire Authority. So as previously, if that happens, I'll present a paper to you and you can discuss it and decide whether to welcome her to the Fire Authority. So it's wait and see for that at the moment. So Appendix 1 is just the elected members. Over the page of my paper on page 46, you'll see that I had a go at nominating people to committees. I have now had a chat with some group leaders in the margins today, and there are a couple of changes which I'll bring to your attention. So having spoken to the Green Group, I'm pleased to say that Dan Thomas has volunteered to be on Policy and Resources Committee, so I've put your name there, Dan, if that's okay, and has also volunteered to be Vice Chair of that committee. And Yasin, therefore, you are going back to the Audit Committee, which I think is your comfort area, so you're on the Audit Committee instead. So you two have swapped over in the green column. So that we have a balance between all the parties, I understand that Councillor Riddle has finally kindly offered to be Vice Chair of the Audit Committee, so thank you for that. But apart from that, there are no other changes unless members need to make me aware of any that they're unhappy about. You will notice there's a slight imbalance. So for the Audit Committee, we have 9 members, whereas for the Policy and Resources Committee, we have 11 members. Now, the reason for that is we have recruited an independent member to your Audit Committee who's a professional. He's an expert in accounts and risk, and he supplements the members on the Audit Committee to bring that expertise, which is why the numbers are slightly different. And we do have the ability to appoint another independent member if we so wish. So I'm taking those appointments as approved. Turning over the page, on page 47 of my paper, we have already discussed the appointment of vice chairs for the committees. We do need to have 2 experienced members on our local pension board. I have spoken to the 2 individuals concerned, and I think they're happy. So Councillors Ron Hardy, thank you very much for volunteering, and Councillor Robert Payne, thank you very much. It is a lighter commitment in that it's only 2 meetings a year rather than 4, and you do get a special responsibility allowance for that role, so we're very grateful to you for that. And there will be some pensions training attached to those roles. For the Local Government Association, we by convention normally appoint the chair to those meetings, so I hope, Ben, you're happy to take on that, which leads the South West Councils and the South West Councils Employers Panel. Councillor David Wilcox has previously fulfilled that role. Would you be happy to continue?
Be happy to, Clerk.
Thank you very much. And then finally, working groups. I will be standing up a Constitution working group to have a look at the remaining chapters of the Constitution. I normally approach the political group leaders in the first instance, so as long as we have those names, then they can nominate who they want to be part of that Constitution working group. Do I have any other volunteers, please, for the charity, the trustees of Gambia and Avon Fire Service in Partnership? I think, Councillor Mohammed, you're already a trustee, so are you happy to continue? Super, thank you. And I've got an expression of interest from Councillor Williams as well, who he's not here at the moment. And Paul? Super, thank you. Okay. So, are there any questions before I go back to the recommendations? No? So the recommendations are that I'm asking you to allocate members to the Fire Authority committees and to appoint your employer representatives to the local pension board. So as per the table on page 46, appoint your representative to the Local Government Association, which is the chair, and appoint your representative for South West Councils, which is Councillor Wilcox. And also I've now got new names for trustees to the Gambia charity. Are you happy to vote on those recommendations en bloc? Yes? Thank you. Any other final questions? Or no? Okay. So any votes against? Any abstentions? Those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you, members. So item 12, which are the dates of the Avon Fire Authority for 24-25, and the clerks to present that as well.
I think we're on number 11.
Oh, we're on, sorry. It's not a great start. Item 11. So, okay, so member information 23-24, which is the clerk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not proposing to go through this paper, you'll be pleased to hear. So this paper simply gives you a printout of the allowances paid to members for last year. And the reason some names you won't recall is that they didn't continue after the last election. So you remember last May we had elections in 3 of the UAs, and some of those members didn't return to the Fire Authority, which is why the amounts at the top are quite low. So 292 would have been a very small proportion of the year, whereas the other members are the members who continued for the rest of the municipal year. At the bottom of the list on Appendix 1, which is on page 53, you'll see 2 additional James. James Mason, he's our independent person who helps with any member misconduct matters. And David Powell is the chap I've just mentioned, who's our newly appointed independent member for the Audit Committee. So they now get an allowance each, so they're at the bottom of the table. So it's just really for you to note that table and to authorise the publication on our website. Councillor Goggin.
Yeah, I just wondered if the allowances for the 2 co-optees are the same for this year going forward?
They are slightly different, Councillor. The reason being the independent person gets an annual retainer, which is why it's a round figure of £1,000, whereas the independent member gets an amount for reading the papers and attending every AJOP meeting, and he was appointed midway through the year. So his figures will go up as he attends more meetings, so hopefully that makes sense. Any other questions at all? So I'm asking for your permission, please, to authorise publication of these figures. Any votes against? Any abstentions? Those in favour? Thank you very much.
Okay, now it's item 12. The Avon Fire Authority meeting dates are 24-25, and Amanda, that's you again.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise for you having to listen to me constantly. So this paper is to ask you to approve the schedule of meetings for the municipal year, but also for us to discuss and hopefully agree an idea when we might hold a workshop to develop a new member officer protocol. So I had put that in the diary for the 5th of July. I had quite an amusing exchange of emails with members about that date after the calling of the general election. I didn't see that there would be an impact, but apparently you're all going to be up till the early hours waiting for election results, and you won't be at your best that Friday. So we have cancelled that. I've seen reason and cancelled it.
We live very fun and interesting lives.
So if you go to page 56 of your bundle, you'll see there's a little table there with all the projected meeting dates. And for member briefings, there's a couple there to be confirmed. And it's basically because I'm trying to work out when I'm going to hold that protocol workshop. And I really want as many members as possible to attend. It's going to be in person. I'm recruiting a lady to come in and help us develop that protocol. So I wanted to get some feedback, really. I have some options from her. She could do the week commencing the 29th of July. She could do a date in August, but I'm aware that a lot of you stand down in August. Or she could do the same day as our AJOP meeting on the 20th of September. So you have a meeting in the morning and a workshop in the afternoon, which is quite neat. But I'm in your hands. Does anyone have any views, or are you able to give me any indication today?
The meeting after the AJOP meeting sounds very convenient for those on audit.
It would mean half of you are invited to that date anyway, so it would just mean the other half tagging on for the other half of the day, if that's okay. So shall I take that as a preferred option and see if I can book the workshop for that day? Okay, super.
Sorry, what day of the week was that?
It is Friday the 20th of September. Yeah. So I know it's a Friday afternoon. I apologise for that, but okay, all right, super, thank you. So I don't intend to go through all the dates individually, so I'm asking you please to approve the proposed schedule of meetings, and I will try and achieve that date for the Member Officer Protocol Workshop on the 20th of September. Any final comments? No? Votes against? Any abstentions? Votes in favour? Thank you very much.
Okay, item 13, which is the update on governance review and the refresh of the Constitution. Amanda.
Right, this is my penultimate paper, thank goodness. So this is the update on the governance review. For those of you who are new, the history to this is we had an extraordinary Fire Authority meeting last April, the 25th of April 23, and we considered a report from some independent governance experts. And they reviewed how we do governance at Avon Fire Authority, and it was found to be committee heavy. We have 3 committees rather than the 2 we have now, and not as efficient as it could be. So lots of changes were recommended, including new terms of reference for the new 2 committees. At that meeting on the 25th of April last year, members voted to accept all 12 recommendations, and you're welcome to look back at that report and see what was recommended. Some of those recommendations we can put in place straight away, which we did, but some were left to me to progress during the rest of the year, and I agreed to provide an update to this meeting, which is why you've got this paper today. So I'm asking you to note the progress that has been made with the independent governance review, I'm also proposing to you a draft training and development strategy for members of the Fire Authority, that's at Appendix 1. And I'm also inviting you to convene a Constitution working group of cross-party members to consider amendments to the remaining chapters of the Avon Fire Authority Constitution. So I'll come back to those recommendations at the end. If you could turn over your papers, please, to page 60. At paragraph 5.1, you'll see I've put in a little table there of the recommendations which we hadn't yet implemented. So numbers 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. And I set out below an update for each of those. So for recommendation 2, appoint an independent member to AJOC, which was in accordance with SIP for best accounting practice. We held a recruitment round and we appointed Mr. David Powell. And that arrangement, I'm pleased to say, is working very well. So I think those members of you on the audit committee will recognise the contribution he's making to those meetings. So that recommendation is complete. Recommendation 4, jointly develop with members a new member officer protocol. We decided to leave that till we had a new cohort of members, and you've now agreed that I can hopefully rearrange that workshop for September. So I'm hoping you will come and help me finish that piece of work in September. Recommendation 5, as I said before, there are some chapters that we may decide we don't need or need to be refreshed. I will convene a Constitution working group and we will work through those remaining chapters, so that recommendation is in progress. Recommendation 7, introduce a new electronic signing process for contracts. That was one I was particularly delighted to see because I used to come into the office to bundles of documents waiting for my signature. We have now identified a supplier and I think we're about to sign on the dotted line for that. We just had to confirm how many licenses we needed. So that is almost done. So I'm confident by the next meeting I can tell you that's in place. Recommendation 8, introduce a new council code of conduct. We did that last year in October and you all had training. I will renew that training and I will let you know when we're going to have a refresh on it. So that one's complete. Recommendation 9, a new performance assurance framework for reporting. This one was slightly more complicated. The consultants recommended a 4-quadrant module for reporting performance, and actually when we compared that to the service plan and our other objectives, it didn't quite align, and so it was going to be quite difficult to present to you, and we didn't want to have to buy a lot of new software or capabilities to try and squeeze information into new quadrants which weren't already on the system. So we reviewed our 6 key objectives and agreed under those 6 headings lots of new additional KPIs which were approved at SLT and SLB level, and I've given you a list at 5.11 of the new KPIs so you can be confident you're getting more reporting on performance. We also have a scorecard and an internal process now for recording progress with the HMI recommendations. So my view is that this is complete and progress is reported to the Policy Resources Committee and also via the Corporate Risk Register to the Audit Committee. So I'm confident that has been completed, albeit in a slightly different format. Recommendation 10 was review preparation of our annual government statements and statements of assurance. Though both of those documents have been refreshed this year into a better format, so I'm confident that is complete. And recommendation 11, in which I need some of your feedback, please, is development of a training and development programme for members. So I'd refer you to Appendix 1, which is on page 67. I did look at various other organisations, and I have to confess I didn't find anything that I thought fitted the bill for us. So this is my work from a blank sheet of paper. I've written, so feel free to give me any brutal feedback you want. It's all my own words. So I've drafted a document there, starts on page 67, ends on page 70, but also has 2 appendices. Now, I know, David, you've already given me some really useful feedback. Would you mind sharing that with members? Because I think it was a very...
David, sorry, can you put your microphone on?
Yep, okay. Oh, I thought it has. A bit of a longer delay, it felt like there.
Thank you. I'll start again then. One of the changes that I'd like to see is that in Appendix 1 on page 71, there's a training course listed, Equality and Dignity in the Workplace. It's categorised as essential for members, but I'd like to see it to be made mandatory for members so that we are getting the same equalities training as firefighters. And I think that's something really important for us to actually understand the terms and the issues that firefighters have in terms of recognising equality and diversity.
Thank you, Councillor. That sounds a very sensible suggestion. Any other comments on this proposed change? Or anything else, indeed, in the draft strategy? I am conscious, members, that you already have some of you busy jobs and busy councillor roles at your UA, so I don't want this to be overly burdensome for you. However, we wouldn't be doing our job properly if we didn't give you the training you needed for your roles. So it's trying to strike that balance is sometimes quite difficult. Councillor Goggin?
I just wondered, in trying to strike that balance, if perhaps training could be recorded and then members can access it at a different time or at their convenience.
That's a really good idea. I think whenever we have online training provided, we will record it so that those who can't make it can catch up. There will be occasions when it's really helpful if people are in the room, but I appreciate you all have busy diaries, so we'll do our best to record what we can. Councillor Riddle?
Thank you very much. I very much welcome the paper because I think you can never have enough training. It's good for the organisation, it's good for us as members as well. I am mindful, though, that some of the training we may have already done at our local authority level, but actually, I'm now going to argue against that because you might do it slightly different and tailor it more around our organisation. So I am comfortable that that we do this, even though we may have done it elsewhere, and it might be some time ago we did it. So actually, I would welcome that and strongly urge all members to take part because training is important.
Thank you. And one good example of that was actually the new Code of Conduct, because we adopted a new code which mirrored 3 of the UAs. And I know a lot of members came back to me and said, well, I've only just done this at my UA, in which case I said, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to come again. But some of the training you will see will be designed specifically for example, your committee role. So we're going to have an expert from SIPFA come in to do some training on finance, for example. And those training events, I think, are going to be particularly important because they're tailored to the fire authority. So, but thank you for your comment. So I've got 2 hands. I think I've got Ron and then Kieran. So Ron?
Yeah, Councillor Riddle stole my thunder a little bit, unusually. I was just about to say exactly the same thing. A number of us would have done in the last year, and a number of us will do now, recently elected councillors, will be carrying out a whole raft of mandatory training required for councillors. I think it's really important that we make sure we don't do the same training twice. And I know that you've just mentioned that one of them that we did last year, we had done already within South Gloucester with the same trainer, in fact, with Beth. So we just need to make sure that we don't duplicate or in some cases triplicate the training, but any training is good training.
I will definitely be minded to that. And I'm going to try not to rush this at you in the first couple of months because I'm conscious you've got a very busy time. So I'll try and maybe postpone the start of this. So although you're approving the strategy today, it may take a little while for it to catch up, if you see what I mean, with the actual practical arrangements. Kieran?
So on the triplicate point, it's similar. So I do EDI at work, you or for citizen advice rights, you can probably work out what I do. GDPR, and I sit on a board of a housing association, I do all those too. So I suppose my question is more of if I can evidence to you that I've done some that are absolutely relevant, then that seems fair.
I think as per, if you have a look at Appendix 2, which is what I'm sort of inviting members to send to me once a year, if possible, before the AGM, with a sort of, this is what we think we need, or this is where we think the gaps are, that will help me identify. I see this as your responsibility to tell me if you're missing something, but equally, if you think I'm offering you something that you already know very well, I will be guided by you. I'm not going to make things mandatory that don't need to be mandatory. So we'll be as sensible as we can. All right? Thank you.
Just quickly, obviously I would encourage all members to attend every single training session that they can, but obviously I know that you all are busy, but I would like to thank Councillor Wilcox for his comments, certainly around equality and diversity. It's incredibly important in terms of anything that we're asking our firefighters to do, that actually we should be doing alongside, and actually it's that journey that we're going on together in terms of how we approach the future, certainly around culture and change. And I would encourage every single person here to attend certainly that training session going forward. Okay?
So going back briefly to my paper, so the last recommendation on page 63 was recommendation 12, which was training and development for officers who report into you. So I have been in conversation with the Chief Fire Officer about this. This matter is in progress. We have had a couple of proposals. One is for how to work in a political environment, how to write reports for members. So we are going to be looking at that training for officers, and it's, again, something that's in progress, and I will update you at the next meeting. So on page 64, I've given you a little table with a summary then. So on the left are the items that have been completed, and on the right, the ones that are still in progress. And I commit to bring you another update at your October meeting. So if we go back to the recommendations. So I'm asking you please to note the progress we've made with the recommendations of the Independent Governance Review, approve the draft training and development strategy for members of Appendix 1 subject to one amendment, which is mandatory for the diversity training, and to convene, by which I mean I'll do this offline with political group leaders, a constitution working group of cross-party members to consider amendments to the remaining chapters of the Constitution. Any final questions before we go to the vote? No? Okay. Any votes against? Are you happy for me to take this on block, by the way? Any votes against? Any abstentions? Those in favour? Thank you very much.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Amanda. Amanda, you're going to get a break now for a little bit. So, item 14, which is the reserve strategy. So, Verity.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is my first of 3 papers today. So this paper is looking at the 4-year reserve strategy of the service. So we are required to produce a reserve strategy on an annual basis, and we're required to publish that on the website. So the recommendation of this paper today is for you to approve the reserve strategy, which is in Appendix 1 to this paper, and also to approve the summary of reserves, which is in Appendix 2. Along with that, the second recommendation is to approve for that reserve strategy to be published on the website. So by way of background, we are required to produce a reserve strategy on an annual basis, as covers a 4-year period. That's a requirement of the Fire and Rescue National Framework. And as part of producing that reserve strategy, we are meant to be looking at the relevance and adequacy of the reserves that we hold as an organisation. So as we move through this, in particular when we look at Appendix 2, we'll be able to see that the Service Leadership Board, in conjunction with myself, have done a review of those reserves in light of those characteristics of whether they're relevant and adequate. And we're presenting that to you today to approve and confirm that you are kind of in agreement with the assessment that we've made. I think I will move on to looking at Appendix 1 first, so the detail of the actual strategy. So Appendix 1 is on page 83. Of your bundles. And what I'll do, I won't go through the whole strategy in detail, but I will just pick out a couple of key points for you to note. So the first is on page 84 in section A. The second paragraph there talks about how there's no statutory minimum or maximum level of reserves, and the Fire Authority, supported by myself, must review those reserves to ensure that they're set at a realistic level. So just to draw your attention to the fact that our reserves can be a level that we choose to set. We are obviously constrained within the resource we've got available to us, and we'll have a look at that a bit later as well. Section B of the strategy looks at the reasons why we hold reserves. So there's 4 reasons there, whether we're building up funds, we've got working balance reserves, future investment needs, or some that are held as a contingency. Again, as we look at the reserves in more detail in the summary of reserves, you'll see that the kind of where we hold reserves that kind of meet those different criteria. The next sections of the strategy really talk about the kind of legislative and statutory requirements of the reserve strategy and the kind of conditions that we're meant to meet as part of the Fire and Rescue National Framework, so I won't cover those in any detail, but I will move on to page 87 and at the bottom, section G, which is the categories of reserves. So there are 2 categories highlighted here. The usable reserves, so these are usually cash-backed reserves that we can use as an authority to meet our future service provisions, so things that we think we need in the future. This strategy focuses on those usable reserves, but we do have another category of reserves, which is the unusable reserves, and they generally arise as a result of kind of legislative or accounting practices. And good examples of those are our pension reserves or our capital adjustment and revaluation reserves. So they're not reserves that we can use to fund future activity. So the focus of this reserve strategy is not on those, but on the usable reserves that we have some discretion over what we do with them. Moving over to page 88, and at the top of that page, it gives you just the different types of usable reserves. So it talks about the general reserve, which is one that meets that criteria of being a working balance. So that's to kind of manage uneven cash flows, unexpected events and emergencies in a financial year. And then we also have earmark reserves, which again can be cash-backed or non-cash-backed, but they are put aside for specific reasons. So where we know there's a future investment requirement, a future project, or potentially as a contingency. And the final thing I just wanted to pick out in this strategy is on the last page, on page 89 of the strategy. It's about halfway down the 2 last paragraphs under the risk assessment title. It just talks in a bit more detail about the general reserve or that working balance, and that we are proposing to continue to hold a general reserve of 1.5 million. That represents just under 3% of our net revenue budget. And we're proposing to continue to hold the reserve at that level. It's been at that level for a number of years because we haven't had to dip into it. So this reserve is one that we hold for emergencies, as I mentioned before, or any working capital requirements and uneven cash flows throughout a year. But that final paragraph in this section just talks about how it's necessary for us to replace that if we do use it. So if at any point we did need to use that, we would have to top it back up again as soon as possible. So it's not one that we are intending to reduce, and that's just there. That's our kind of contingency reserve, really. And there is, within the guidance, it talks about kind of providing justification if you're going to hold a general reserve that's more than 5% of your revenue budget. So whilst there's no statutory reserve levels, the fact that we're holding around 3% seems to fit in with that guidance, that we're not over the 5% that they mention. Moving on to Appendix 2, which is page 91 of your bundles, and I'm just going to talk through briefly kind of what this is showing you and the different types of reserves we have. So the first column is the balance as at June 2023. So that's the reserve balances that were presented to the Fire Authority this time last year as part of the reserve strategy that was approved last year. We then have the next column along with being the movement during 23-24. So that movement will tie into the papers that I'll present to you later on today on the capital and revenue outturn for the year. So that's where we have utilised reserves to fund various things that have happened during the year, or where we have topped reserves up where we've had sufficient headroom within our revenue budget to do that. So that's the movements on the reserves. The third column is the transfer between reserves. So you'll see that that's net nil overall. That's movements between reserves that have arisen as a result of the review that the Service Leadership Board, in conjunction with myself, have done in recent weeks. And it's where we've done the adequacy and relevance review. So we've looked at each reserve and said, do we still need that? And is there enough in there? So anything that's with a negative balance within that column we've removed or reduced, and then we've created or added to 2 new ones. So the particular ones I wanted to draw your attention to are the IT infrastructure reserve. So you'll be able to see that it started off at 253,000. We've used 253,000 in the year, and actually that got transferred to the capital reserve and then used to fund some capital projects in the year. But what we've done is added, as part of the reserves review, we've added 200,000 back into that reserve. On the assumption that we know that there is future IT investment requirement within the service. We have got some IT allocation within the capital programme, and we have allocated an element to the revenue budget, but we're also aware that the service and the IT infrastructure of the service is likely to potentially need more investment than that. So this is to help fund that in the future. The second reserve that I wanted to just draw attention to that we've actually created a new reserve, is the PFI exit reserve. Again, we've added £200,000 to that reserve. So the PFI arrangement is due to come to an end at the end of March 2028. We are expecting there to be costs associated with exiting that contract. We don't know what they're going to be yet. So this is just to start preparing for those costs, so putting some money aside while we've been able to this year. That brings us to the fourth column, which is the unaudited balance as at March 2024. So that ties into the reserves that are presented in the draft statement of accounts that have been published recently for the year ended March 2024. And then the final four columns are forecast over the 4-year period of the reserve strategy as to how we think those reserves are going to unwind over the next 4 years. This is based on a set of assumptions, and it's prepared to align with the medium-term financial plan. So members that were at the meetings where the medium-term financial plan was reviewed and approved will know that we have got significant savings requirements over that 4-year period, and so therefore the assumption would be that we're not going to have underspends on our revenue budget to be able to top the reserves back up. It doesn't paint a very pretty picture here, and obviously things will change, but to align the assumptions between the two, that's where we're going. So a lot of the reserves we hold in this top section, which are earmarked reserves and designated for projects that we think are coming up, are likely to be used in the next few years because they're known future priorities. There are a few that remain, so things like the ill health pension and the legal fees reserves are ones that are more like contingency funds. So we have an element of allocation each year in the revenue budget, but it could be that we overspend and we've got a reserve there just in case. Those are the ones that tend to continue. The other things that I wanted to just draw your attention to are the two blue earmarked reserves. Whilst I've just said that we are able to do and kind of choose what we do with our earmarked reserves, these two blue ones are slightly different, and they've arisen as a result of funding and grant funding that's come from the Home Office, from central government. So they have been given to us for specific purposes, and we can only use them for those purposes. So we can't change those two blue ones there. Moving down, we've got the PFI Equalisation Fund. Again, this isn't one that we can utilise for anything other than the PFI fund. It will unwind as the PFI contract comes to an end, so there'll be nil balance at the end of March 2028. We've got the General Reserve, which I've already talked about, being retained at the 1.5 million every year because we have to top that back up. And then the final one we've got is the Capital Reserve at the bottom there. So during the year, we've used the Capital Reserve to fund the capital programme, and we have around 5.2 million left at the end of March. The forecast is that that will be fully utilised by the end of next year, which aligns to the assumptions within the capital programme. So that reserve arose as a result of the sale of the previous headquarters. It's been used to fund the capital programme for a number of years and is now coming to an end. So we see that's quite a big reason why we're seeing our reserves drop over the 4-year period, is because that capital reserve will be fully utilised. I think that's all I wanted to say on the reserve, so I don't know if anyone's got any questions that they might want to ask.
Any questions for Verity?
Hi, thank you very much for that, Verity, and thanks for preparing this. I'm just going to clarify. The general reserves we hold, they're not set at any particular level, and so in times of stability we could lower them, and in times of uncertainty we could raise them. That is something that is discretionary to us, yeah?
Come on. The problem would be is, like I said, in the medium-term financial plan, if we're thinking we'd like to have a few more reserves to help us have a bit more resilience, we might not be in a position to build those up. It's kind of getting that balance right over the next few years.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Verity, for your report. I've got a question and a whinge, as it's my normal whinge at Fire Authority meetings. You probably might even guess what it is. It's about the two blue items, the Technical Fire Safety Reserve. Most grants from central government tend to expire and we have to get the money back. Is that the case for this one?
I don't believe so. I'm just looking at Claire. No, I don't believe so. And they're actually continuing to top that one up. So we received an additional £400,000 this year, and we are then spending that money. So I think we spent around £300,000 against that one, yeah.
So that is specific funding we receive to top up our protection element of the service. So it's around, we've changed the staffing model within there, and there have been a number of other developments. We actually had to undertake a deep dive with the Home Office last financial year to secure that funding for 23-24, but we did actually secure all of that funding, and they've granted us a certain amount for 24-25. But as you can see, the plan is to actually spend that money, so there are already spending plans in place for that. At the moment, they haven't said what's going to happen with that going forward, but we know we've certainly got an allocation in 24-25, but our assumption is that then it will just become a part of the standard process. So hopefully that makes sense.
We have a spending profile against that, which is just referenced there, and report back on a quarterly basis about our spend anyway. Part of that also is about the building safety regulator and our role and new role in terms of the building safety regulator. In essence, that's kind of been prime initially, get it up and running. The view is that funding in terms of that's linked to the building safety regulator will also become self-funded through recharge mechanism. So we expect that the Home Office funding for that particular element of fire protection will start to phase out as it becomes more embedded into the multidisciplinary teams as part of the regulator.
Thank you for that, Simon. And my whinge is about the last item in blue, which is the ESMCP reserve. New members might not know what an ESMCP is. It's the Emergency Services Network, which is going to be able to talk to all the emergency services, police, fire and ambulance services, which has been on order for the past decade, or is it 2 decades?
I'd probably edge more towards 2 decades, to be honest, Councillor. Yes. It's been seems to be an ongoing programme that has been exposed to continual reviews, deep dives, and I guess pauses and slow down, different strategies, different approaches. So we're still no further forward in terms of when it's likely to be delivered. Of course, any general election, forthcoming general election, may also sort of influence where we are with that. But the airwave system itself is still being maintained. So we still have a radio communication network. But of course, at some stage or another, that will become old technology and need to be phased out for ESMCP. But you'll get as good as mine at the moment as whether or not it will still meet its expectations in terms of delivery times.
Indeed, I was going to implore whoever is in power after July the 4th to actually pull the finger out and deliver the thing, because it's essential that we have this method of actually communicating safely and securely with the other emergency services. It's something that's been really lacking over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, and just to clarify for new members, we as a service have no influence. Individual services, and as Councillor Wilcox said there, it's police, fire and ambulance and Coast Guard as well. And we have no influence as a service. It is a centrally run programme, and we're very much at the behest of the pace of that programme and the deliverables against the spend. Now that money that's in there is ring fenced, we can't use it anywhere else, and it is for particularly project deliverables, and it's unsure whether or not all that funding will actually meet all of our expenditure as well. We have had a member of staff who we seconded in the fire control environment to start to progress some of those elements, but now another review of the whole programme has taken place, so that's kind of paused a little bit.
Right, I've got Councillor Connolly and then Eddie.
So my question just around the general reserve, so it's about 3% or so of our revenue. As part of this process, do we do any kind of scenario modelling or stress testing, you might call it in finance, for things where in-year things might happen unexpectedly, and whether we can weather that storm, whether that's interest rates, whether that's higher pay offers? Like, do we do stress testing as part of this process?
We do kind of scenario when we do the MTFP. So when we've developed the medium-term financial plan and the assumptions that we've made there, we would look at scenarios. And then we've obviously the approved medium-term financial plan is kind of what's informed this process. But you're absolutely right. It's something that becomes even more relevant as we have fewer reserves going forwards.
Councillor Eddie.
Can I equally thank Verity for her report? It doesn't throw up any particular red lights for me. I assume all similar fire authorities in transparencies have to actually produce their reserve strategies. If so, is our reserve strategy, does it have any variances or particular practices which are different to others, and if so, why?
I'm not aware that we're adopting anything particularly different from other services. I know that the Home Office did a review of reserve strategies relatively recently as well, and they were due to come back to us if there was anything that they were unhappy with, and we didn't receive any correspondence on that. So I'm assuming that we're not doing anything unusual.
Any other questions on this item? No? Okay. So once again, item 14 is for approval. So one is to approve the 2024-2028 reserve strategy and to agree for them to be published on the website. Can I take those on block? Is everyone happy? So votes against? Any abstentions? All votes for. Thank you, members. Okay, so item 15, which is the 2023-24 capital programme final outrun position, and that's Verity again.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is paper 15, page 93 of your bundles, and this paper is bringing to you a summary of where the 23-24 year ended up in terms of capital spend. This paper is just for noting, and it gives you a little bit of background in terms of the capital programme that was approved for 23-24. So we originally had a programme approved of around 6.3 million. There have been a couple of pull forwards during the year to make the 23-24 allocation around 6.7 million. That's all shown in Appendix 1 on page 97. And there's a second appendix which shows you the overall three-year capital programme starting in the 23-24 financial year. The kind of purpose of including that appendix there is just to show you that that pull forward is just a rephasing, and the overall capital spend within the programme is unchanged as a result of that. I'll move on to section 5 of the paper, which begins on page 94, just to talk through the main areas of spend and any variances that we've had against the programme. So the largest element of the capital programme for 23-24 was the premises budget. So we had allocated just under £3.5 million. We've actually spent just under £2.7 million. So there's been an £800,000 underspend there. The majority of the work that's happened in the premises area of the service has been on the Bedminster station refurbishment and the work that's been going on there. And the £800,000 underspend isn't underspend as such, it's slippage and will be spent in 24-25. So the Bedminster project is due to come in on target in terms of the approved level of spend. There's just been a slight rephasing and timing changes of when that spend is being incurred. So that £800,000 has formed part of the assumptions when we've generated the 24-25 capital programme. We made an assumption on an element of slippage on that programme based on the information we had at the time. So that's not underspend on the overall programme, it's just a timing difference for the year. The fleet element of the capital programme, we had approved just around 1.5 million of spend. The fleet element is where we've had most of that pull forward that I talked about earlier. So £350,000 was pulled forward from future years into this year to fund the programme. And the majority of that spend has been on Type B appliances, so the kind of appliance that we saw this afternoon. There were four of those purchased during 23-24, and the final milestone payments for those were incurred they tend to take more than a year to build, so they were in assets under construction. We've made those final payments during 23-24 and brought those into service. The fleet element of the capital programme has also spent some money on a new Pioneer boat and some other items as part of the fleet replacement strategy as well. Paragraphs 5.3 and 5.4 talk about the smaller elements of the capital programme, but the other areas that we've spent money. So we've spent money around just over £100,000 on operational equipment. We spent £170,000 on mobile data terminals, and I think they were pointed out on the appliances earlier. So they were part of an investment to help address some of the causes of concern raised by the HMICFRS inspection. And we've also spent £120,000 on IT hardware purchases as well. Those three elements of the capital programme have underspent across the three elements, and they're ones that are not rephasing, so they are genuine underspends. And the particular one to note is the transformation programme. So the transformation was a time-bound programme, and it's due to be completed by the end of March 2025. So when the future capital programme was developed, we looked at what was left in terms of the transformation projects and the elements that were capital, and we put an allocation in the 24-25 programme, and then anything else has just been underspend for that element of the programme. The final element I just wanted to pick up on was the control budget. So we spent around £190,000 on radio replacements. We have again seen an underspend in this area, but this is another one that's been rephased. So there are significant investments being made in the control element of the service over the coming years, and so that underspend this year has just been rephased into future years, where we are planning to make a significant investment on the mobilisation system upgrade. So the procurement process is underway for that, and that's been taken into account in the 24-25 programme. We have added a third appendix to this paper, which is on page 101 of your bundles, and this is just to help with kind of bridging the gap between the approved capital programme that the authority signed off earlier this year and then taking into account the outturn that I've just presented for you today. So I mentioned that when we generated this programme, we made some assumptions on how we thought 23-24 would turn out, and now we're just aligning those assumptions with the reality. And in particular, there was that slippage on Bedminster. We made an assumption on what we thought that might look like at the time that we generated the original capital programme. So this is for the 3-year period starting in 24-25, and then what we've done here is just aligned it to what's actually happened. And you can see it's a really small adjustment. It's only £3,000 on the actual spend of the premises element of the programme. But the other bit that I wanted to just point out to you is in the funding section, because there have been some slight changes there. So we made some assumptions on how the capital reserve would be utilised, and actually the reserve is slightly higher than we expected it to be. So you can see if you look on the capital reserve line on the right-hand side, you can see the 5.2 million. That aligns to the reserve strategy that we've just looked at previously, and that's the element of reserves that are left to fund the programme. So we've just adjusted to make sure that that reflects where we are actually with the reserves for the end of the year. And we've also added in the capital receipt from a house sale, so there's £250,000 of additional funding there. The service owns one residential property. It's been previously rented out to an employee, and we are expecting to sell that property during 24-25. So once that property is sold, we can use those funds to fund future capital investment. So that property was revalued as part of our year-end property valuation processes, and so we've added in the receipt there. The impact of both of those adjustments is that the prudential borrowing requirement has been shifted slightly to the right. So the initial capital programme for 24-25 assumed that we'd have to borrow around £366,000 to balance, be able to fund all of the investment requirements for 24-25. With these slight adjustments, actually, that borrowing requirement slips into 25-26. When you're looking at timing, it is relatively small, but it just crosses that boundary across the 2 years. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that change. And what will happen when we report to the Policy and Resources Committee as the year progresses, we'll be reporting against this updated approved capital programme. And then I'd like to open up for any questions if there are any.
Serena?
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but I'm just intrigued about the house sale, how that came about. Is that normal for a fire authority estate, or what happened there?
So it's our remaining last property that we owned. The occupant was an employee who had almost a lifetime rental agreement. Very sadly, that employee recently passed away, which has then obviously enabled the property to be available. Of course, that will terminate the lease agreement from that perspective, so that is why that's come into the capital programme now.
If it was usual for fire authorities to have estate properties like that, or is that just a bit of an anomaly? I wouldn't know.
It pretty much stems from kind of a model where on-call firefighters, if an on-call station was close by, often a fire authority would own a sort of accommodation, different levels of accommodation, and that's just the last remaining one that we held as an authority. Prior to that, there would have been others, but they've been sold off, depending on whatever the lease agreements were of those particular properties. So that's why it's a legacy property that we own.
Councillor Goggin?
Yeah, I'm just asking this question, and it may have been answered when I was slacking off and lying in a coma last year. But the possibility that was floated about moving headquarters, has that been progressed at all?
Not at this moment in time, other than aligning that to the end of the PFI project. So you'll see in a previous paper in terms of reserves, we'd put a small amount aside to start to progress what that might look like in terms of the end of the PFI arrangement, and that is the 7-park training facility, as to whether or not that provides us with some opportunities in terms of rationalising the estate. So at the moment, we're remaining with our current arrangement until we align it to that time frame, which is March 2028 when that PFI arrangement comes to a close. But we will be bringing a paper to the authority once we've got all of the relevant details for a decision to be made.
Councillor Payne.
Thank you. Yes, I just was going to ask about the Bath and Weston-super-Mare station redevelopments. Obviously, they were put on hold and they're not in the capital programme at all now. So what's the timescale for bringing them back into the capital programme?
Yeah, I can come in again there, Councillor, as well. So a paper will be presented to the Policy and Resources Committee in July, which will bring forward the capital programme, which is specifically relating to the Bath rebuild and the Western redevelopment for a budget to be aligned or agreed by the authority. And within that paper will be the timelines of the construction phases, tendering phases, the design phases, etc. for each of the two projects.
Just to add to that as well, the Bath and Western projects were not in the capital programme for the 23-24 plus 3-year capital programme, but they are now in the 24-25 3-year capital programme. So if you compare Appendix 2 and Appendix 3 of this paper, you can see the previous capital programme was for around 12.5 million. It's now over 34 million. A big reason for that increase is the inclusion of more premises projects within there, which are the Bath and Western redevelopments. The amounts that have been allocated are assumptions, and as Simon says, papers will be brought to the authority for approval to confirm the phasing of that spend and everything else, but we have put an allocation within the current capital programme for those.
Okay, any further questions on that item? Yes?
Thank you. So in terms of a capital program in future years, so on this one, on point 5.6, so mobilization upgrade. So can you elaborate like what specifically, under this program we are upgrading and how this gonna impact the operations?
So certainly, yes. So that is what we would call a technical refresh. So the current system which accommodates and houses the actual mobilising software is towards end of life. So the hardware, etc., is the end of life. So it's a normal refresh program. So we're coming into the window of its refresh. So the capital expenditure is a mixture of capital and revenue within there, but the capital expenditure is relating to the technical refresh of all of the hardware that houses the mobilising system itself. And the proposal within that is to go to more of a hosted system. Currently, we provide 2 separate setups on premises. So we have one at our primary control and we have one at our secondary control as well. And part of the programme and technical refresh is more to move towards a hosted by the preferred supplier, whomever bids against the tender. So that's what that is relating to. We've made investments already in fire control as a result of the accelerated course concern. We've made investments in relation to the software upgrades, the current package that's available, the most recent software release. Windows, again, is a software package that we've upgraded, and we've upgraded some hardware in relation to the monitors. But this is about the technical, the hardware systems, so all the hard drives, etc., that host the mobilising system itself. Okay.
Okay, any final questions on that item? No? Okay, so that's been noted. So item 16 is the 2023-2024 revenue budget final outrun position, and that's Verity and Claire.
Thank you. Yes, so this is paper 16 starting on page 103, and this is in a similar way to we were looking at the capital outturn for the last financial year. This is looking at the revenue outturn for the last financial year in comparison to the budget and any variances. So as with the capital paper, this one is for noting as well. There are 2 appendices to this paper. Appendix 1 gives you a summary of the revenue budget, and then Appendix 2 gives you a little bit more granular detail of a little bit further breakdowns of that revenue budget. Moving on to section 5, starting on page 104. So this section is where it talks about what we've actually spent the money on and any variances against the budget. So income is covered in the first 3 paragraphs on the top of page 104, and you'll see that we have had around £1 million of over-recovery on income. We have reported this to the Policy and Resources Committee over at least two Policy and Resources Committees during the year. So this isn't a surprise, and there are 3 kind of main reasons for that over-recovery of income compared to the original budget. So the first is the business rates relief grant. So we had around £450,000 of additional income relating to that grant, and it's all to do with the reconciliation process, and it relates to prior year. So the reconciliation process happens later and across a number of stages, and we're never sure how that's going to end up. So we have now had that final confirmation and have an additional £450,000 of revenue relating to 22-23, but having been received in 23-24. Another reason for the additional income is around £300,000 of additional investment income. Interest rates were higher than we expected during 23-24, and I think on average we generated interest on our bank balances of around 4.7%, which is a lot higher than we've had in previous years. So obviously resulting in a higher interest and an additional income. That's not something that we're necessarily expecting to continue. If we're linking back to the reserves paper, we're seeing those reserves drop, which kind of links to our cash balances reducing as well as we utilise those reserves, and the fact that we think interest rates are likely to reduce as well. So we're not necessarily expecting that to be a repeat, but something that's happened during 23-24. The final element of income that kind of contributes to that over-recovery is the other income line. So there's quite a few different things within that other income line, but the kind of most significant ones to pull out are there's around £150,000 of additional kind of recharges and recoveries, and in particular some SWAST reconciliation income, again relating to prior year. And we've also had around £60,000 of additional learning L&D income, so training and income from relating to the apprenticeships of the firefighters as well. So that £1 million of over-recovery of income, actually, as we move through the paper, you'll see that there have been some overspends in the year, and we've been able to help mitigate some of those overspends and also minimise some of the utilisation of reserves as well. So moving on to employee costs, starting at paragraph 5.4 of your paper. So employee costs are the most significant costs for the service in terms of the revenue budget, and the employee costs that we present here today include all of the agreed pay awards for all 3 of the pay groups. I'll pick out just the 3 main variances to budget in terms of pay and employee costs. So the first one is on-call firefighter pay costs. So we have seen around £350,000 underspend on that line in comparison to the budget. And that line an element of that line is fixed and based on the retained fees, but there's also an element that's variable and dependent on the number of call-outs, and they've just been a lot lower this year than the budget expected. So we've seen an underspend there. The corporate staff budget has got an overspend. There's around £550,000. There's 2 main reasons for that. The first being some additional staff posts that have been approved, so the improvement team and dedicated resources to help address the HMICFRS action plan work, and also some additional teams for SSRI, so that's the site-specific risk information, which also links to some of the actions coming out of the HMICFRS review. The second reason for corporate staff budget having been overspent is around the pay award. So the budget assumed a 4% pay award across all staff, but actually what happened was the pay award was allocated at a flat rate, so it was around £1,900 per person, and obviously that meant different percentages for different people, but overall that meant that it cost the service around £200,000 more compared to what we'd originally budgeted for. Moving on to paragraph 5.7, the final kind of element of employee costs that I'm just going to pick out. There's been an overspend on the pension costs line of around £500,000. Again, 2 main reasons for this. The first is the actuarial valuation of the fund. So the local government pension scheme, the actuary is Mercer, and they completed a valuation of that fund during 23-24, and the fund had a more significant deficit than previously. So they introduced a kind of 3-year payment profile to help mitigate and reduce that deficit. And so we made the first payment during 23-24, but that was not something that was known about at the time the budget was set. So it's been a variance to the budget, but it is something that we have incorporated within the budget setting and medium-term financial plan for the next 2 years to make sure that we've taken that into account. The other element of pension costs relates to the ill health retirement pension costs. So we build the budget based on the existing ill health retirements we have within the service, and then some assumptions and allowances for additional ill health retirements that might materialise during the year. And actually they've just been higher than were expected during the year. What we have done is released an element of the pension reserve to help mitigate some of that overspend. And again, if we looked at the detail of the reserve summary, there was £150,000 of utilisation of that pension reserve shown there. The final, it's this penultimate element of the revenue budget that I was going to just mention was supplies and services. So we've seen an underspend on this line. The main reason for that, and it's in the equipment and supplies line, is to do with the adoption of a new stock management or inventory management software kind of bolt onto our financial system, and it just allows us to be able to manage and control our stock in a more robust way. And as a result of introducing that, we've kind of had a more detailed review of the level of stock that we hold at the end of March 2024, and actually there was more stock than we previously recorded, and it results in a credit or a benefit to the income statement, so the revenue account for 23-24, but it is a one-off. It's not something that will necessarily happen again, and what will happen is as that stock is utilised, it will be charged to the income and expenditure account during the next year. We've also seen some underspends in the training line within supplies and services as well, but both of these have been partially offset by some additional costs within the fees and services line. So legal costs come in there. We've had additional legal costs during the year for various different cases, and we've also incurred some additional costs to help address some of the actions that were arising as a result of the HMICFRS Spotlight report, and examples of the kind of things that we've been introducing are the DBS checking and the confidential reporting line. So the costs associated with that were kind of over and above what was originally assumed within the budget. The last section of the revenue budget that I wanted to talk about was other costs. So it's right at the bottom of the revenue account. So if we looked at Appendix 2 on page 111, it's that last section at the bottom. And there are a few, this is where we've got kind of a few items. So the contingency line is one I wanted to just draw your attention to. So we fortunately had a £390,000 contingency within the revenue budget for 23-24. As you can see here in the actual column, we did not spend that budget, so we didn't need to use that contingency. But what we have done is used it to top up reserves during the year. So we've used that to add to the legal fees reserve because we are expecting, and we know that there will be a settlement associated with an employment tribunal, but we don't know what that value is yet. So that's just to make sure that we've got some resource available for when we find that out. We've also contributed £500,000 to the capital programme. So as you've seen, our capital reserve is reducing, and so we've been able to just top that up slightly. So again, push that borrowing requirement out to the right. And then the last line, the transfers to and from reserves, this has moved around quite a bit. So we obviously set a budget based on a level of reserves that we were expecting to release to match against the costs that we were incurring for various projects. That's changed during the year because different projects happen and various things have happened. So there's quite a variance there. But if I can draw your attention back to the main body of the report, and on page 106, paragraph 5.12 gives you the breakdown of what's happened within reserves, which will tie back into that reserve strategy paper as well. So the first section of bullet points are all around where we've utilised reserves, so where costs have been incurred and we've then released the reserves to offset those costs. And then the second section is around where we've topped reserves up again. So as I mentioned, the £391,000 from the contingency provision that we didn't need. We've also received some additional protection uplift funding, which links back to that one of those blue earmarked reserves that we can't use for anything else. That's additional Home Office funding that we've used to top up reserves. And then the final thing just to mention, so we are required to balance our budget each year, and we have produced a balanced budget for this year, and we actually had a slight underspend, which meant that we could add to our reserves with that underspend to balance the budget. So there's £234,000 of underspend for the year that we've used to top up reserves. And what we've done is put that into a reserve called priority programmes, which we've put aside for any future priorities of the service. That's investing in different projects, different procedures, or investing to save money in the future as well. So that's been used to top up that reserve this year. And the net of all of those bullet points come back to the £67,000 you can see in Appendix 2. And then if there's any questions.
Almost got away then, but Councillor Riddle.
This is very much splitting hairs, but I think it's important. In the page 111, where it says income, it talks about income from councils. Now, this is actually money that we've asked councils to collect for us through the Fire Authority precept, isn't it? So I'm just making sure we understand where it's coming from.
Yes, and I'm just going to check with Claire. It doesn't include any business, non-domestic.
So the income from councils would be, yes, our precept income, which is agreed by the Fire Authority, and also our share of the business rates, which our unitary authorities notify us of. So that's what makes up that figure. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for that clarification.
I've got Councillor Reddard, then Councillor Sally.
Probably a slightly detailed one, but so the income coming from council, so the council's taken on the liability of ensuring that they collect all of the precepts income, then they have to pay you as the fire authority regardless, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. And then my second question was on pensions. So obviously the valuations come in with more of a deficit. So presumably then, is it the next valuation in 26-27? And was there any particular things that Mercer identified as to why there's been the sudden change? Appreciate if you need to take that away, that's fine.
Yeah, I think that might be one I'd have to take away and have a look at the report to see if there's anything specific in there. I'm not sure if they define when the next valuation will be either, or whether it's always on a 3-year basis. It can vary. So I can take it away and have a look if they confirm any of that in the report and come back to you.
Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. Yeah, so got a couple of questions in terms of employee cost. So to start with the Green Book Pay Award. So how does the Green Book Pay Award for corporate staff impact the overall budget? So that's the first question. And if you want to answer that one first, so yeah.
In terms of actual value, I don't know the number off the top of my head. I just know we had a variance of around 200k compared to the budget. I might have to take, unless Claire...
I think in terms of the 4%, it was around about, around about 300,000, and then because it wasn't actually 4%, so most of our staff are, they got more than 4%, so that added on the extra 200, but it's quite small by comparison to the other pay awards.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is we have to make an assumption on pay awards. So we built the budget based on a 4% assumption, and that has historically been around the level. And I think the fact that they did a flat rate just meant that some people got a higher percentage than that 4%.
Right. Thank you. And the next one, in terms of a pension. So what are the potential long-term benefit of paying additional 523,000 in pension costs this year? Can we see any additional benefits, like,
part of that is the additional ill health retirement pensions, and there's no discretion over that balance. We have to pay those pensions to those pensioners. There's around 370,000, which is the contribution to the deficit of the fund. So the only benefit for that would be we're bringing the fund back into a better position. I don't think that there's any discretion over being able to pay that as well. The fund gives us a valuation and a recovery plan, if that's the right word, to contribute.
So by actually paying that up front, we actually then get a discounted rate on what we pay into the pension fund. Right. So if we were to wait until the deficit actually arises, it would cost us more. So by paying that ahead of time, we're actually topping up that pension fund so that deficit decreases ultimately.
Right. Thank you. And the last one, in terms of premises cost. So do we have any future plan to ensure the premises cost stay within the budget?
So we regularly, part of our state strategy is we regularly have condition reports on each of the buildings that we, or the authority, own. Those condition reports will then influence, obviously, the maintenance strategy. We have a net zero carbon emission by 2030 policy. So we try to invest in our premises to make them more energy efficient, and also obviously to try to offset any increased maintenance costs through a lack of repair and so on. In relation to the new builds, so Bath and a complete refurb of Weston-super-Mare, when they come to the authority in July, within that part you'll see the standards that we want the construction to meet to ensure that it has minimal costs, and we reduce the annual running costs of those particular buildings year on year, certainly in the early stages. But it is always a very difficult one because we have got very much an ageing building stock. And therefore that it becomes a real challenge to ensure that the buildings are fit for purpose and meet all the recognised standards for a modern workplace. and also obviously the maintenance and the rising costs of construction and repairs as well. So I will say my professional view in terms of the estates team is I think they do really well to manage the budget they have, really well. You can see in some of the reports we've had some underspends in premises, and that also links to procurement and trying to get the maximum value out of procurement for particular contracts, particular maintenance contracts as well. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of what we're always constantly trying to look at, but it's not an easy one. Oh, yeah. So in the initial stages, sort of post-COVID, if you like, and the fluctuation of material costs, we were finding it incredibly difficult for suppliers to commit to the cost of materials. So there was a little bit of subject to when we were going out to contract any changes in obviously rising costs within the materials of construction or repairs, a replacement of items in the premises. What we found at the moment is that stabilised a little bit now, and there seems a little bit more confidence in the industry to set a fixed price. So now we can get a much more accurate picture in relation to any contract awards that it's likely to come in on target or sort of in budget, should we say.
Any further questions on that item? No? Okay. I will make one comment in terms of the increased employee costs. Obviously, it just shows our commitment to the, in terms of responding to the HMIC FRS investigation, that actually this authority and the fire service in Avon are actually, adding that extra investment to deal with some of the causes of concern that have been raised with us. So obviously for our newer members, it's just to highlight that once again, it's that continued investment and response to that investigation. That's why you're seeing those increased in costs, okay? Okay, so that item 16 was just for noting. So thank you, Verity, thank you, Claire. Item 17 is the appointment of a new Assistant Chief Fire Officer, which the CFO and the clerk are to present. So Simon and Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll do a quick summary of the process that we've gone through, and then your Chief Fire Officer will give you an update on where we are today. So you will recall that Assistant Chief Fire Officer Steve Imrie retired from the service on the 31st of May. It was quite an emotional day when he left the building. And at your last Fire Authority meeting on the 20th of March, you kindly approved a new job description, advert and recruitment process for a new Assistant Chief. So that process has now taken place. And if you turn over the page, on page 114, it was a very competitive process. So we had an advert closing date of the 30th of April. We received 4 very good applications which met the criteria for the role. We convened a panel of members to support the Chief Fire Officer, and they shortlisted all 4 candidates to go forward. Week commencing 13th of May, they participated in a very challenging critical incident and business continuity exercise at Lansdowne, and then they had separate stakeholder engagement forums, some with external stakeholders and other with internal staff stakeholders. We then had another meeting with elected members when we considered the performance of all 4 candidates in those stages, and a decision was taken that they had all performed well and they should all be invited for final interview. And I'm pleased to say that we had a very long but rewarding interview process on Monday the 3rd of June. The panel members are here to tell you if you want to ask them any questions. So all 4 candidates delivered presentations and were interviewed by the panel, and we had a very long day. So I'll now hand over to the Chief to tell you the decision that was taken on that day.
Thank you, Amanda. So members, I'm pleased to say, as Amanda just said there, on a very tough recruitment process over a long period of time, where we expose their candidates to particular experiences that will be relevant to the role, and also touch with different areas of the service and stakeholders. So we get a real rounded view of each of the candidates. And final interviews, as Amanda said there, the panel of elected members took place on Monday the 3rd of June. And I'm very pleased to join the chair of my congratulations to say that our internal candidate Luke Gazard, so my right here, was successful. So Aaron Manager Luke Gazard was successfully appointed to our main Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Service Delivery. Luke joined the service in 1999 and has worked at Avon in Bath and Patchway, and has worked in risk intelligence in Overway, which is where our key equipment are, and has more recently been heading up the service improvement team, particularly different scans that were reported through the Policy and Resources Committee. The panel were also very impressed by all of the candidates, but in particular by the candidate Temporary Area Manager Paul Lyons of Greater Manchester Fire Rescue Service. And as a panel, we decided that she would be an excellent asset to our service, and so the panel decided to create a temporary role until March 2025 to the role of Assistant Chief Officer, where she will lead on the services improvement team, improvement programme, expanding that portfolio slightly so that she can gain experience at board level, and then she will be join the service, or she will then revert back to a substantive area manager role to match our strategy. Paul has been a firefighter at Hampshire Fire Rescue Service before moving to Manchester, which has been an operational watch manager, a station manager, HMRC FOS Service Liaison Officer, and currently her role in Manchester, Greater Manchester Fire Rescue Service is head of service delivery in the north area of Manchester. She's an advocate of inclusion and has worked hard to support women in the Fire Rescue Service. Two excellent candidates. My congratulations to Luke on his appointment, but also very excited for Paul to be joining us. We hope around about the 12th of July. So, thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Goggin?
It's not a question, it's more of a statement. Welcome, Luke, although obviously it's not a welcome to the service, it's a welcome to the role. Thank you for stepping up and into the fire, if you'll excuse the pun. And good luck to Paula too, and we look forward to meeting her.
Any other questions? So you're just being asked to note and endorse. It is actually the Chief Fire Officer's decision under the Constitution to appoint his Assistant Chief. So it's just note and endorse that decision, the appointment of the new Chief Fire Officer, Luke Gazzard. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So item 18 is the date of the next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 2nd of October 2024 at 2 o'clock. Venue is the main conference room at headquarters. So see you then.
Thank you. Thank you very much, members.